Hello and welcome to the latest episode of Chasing Hope with me, your host, Catherine Abraham. Our episode today highlights one of the most important strategies of human life: prayer. But how can prayer be a strategy? Is it just a direct communication with God and a spiritual invocation? Well, it is all of that and more. In one of my recent tiffs with God Himself, and you may be shocked to hear this, but I do fight with Him just as a child fights with their parent. When you don't get the answers, and when whatever is given to you is really not enough. But soon enough you realize that it's not a very good strategy, because you've just got to go back there and ask them, can you please let me know why this happened? So prayer in many ways is the establishment of a lifelong relationship with the divine. So many times people make it about a human advisory to God, where you tell Him, I'd like you to give me a car by tomorrow. I'd like you to give me this job by next month. I think that girl is perfect for me. I think that boy should be married. We are playing the human advisory board to the divine. Instead, how about just submitting and telling Him, Father, you know what's right for me. You know what's right for my family. Please have your way in me. It is here that you become close with your Maker. You speak to Him as Father and friend. You ask Him to help you in multiple capacities. You fight with Him, you talk to Him, you cry out to Him. And when you do all of that, you feel that your world is complete because you have been honest. In the not so distant past, I was discussing faith over a phone call with a friend. And incidentally, she remarked, but Catherine, I don't see myself as a church person. I wondered, wait, what is a church kind of person? You know, like the one who's constantly preaching everywhere but really nothing comes of it. It is indeed a sorrowful state when believers choose to stay home rather than visiting their churches and meeting their fellow believers. But I digress. This isn't about the lack of fellowship. It is about the absence of a strategy, and the strategy called prayer. Now, when I put the phone down, I realized that while my friend highlighted that she was most definitely a believer, she was also very far from practical faith. First things first, you ought to understand that prayer is not just another talk, a communion, or a litany of your suffering. God already knows all of it. Then what is it that prayer needs to work in your life? And how does it happen? When we look at prayer as the understanding that our answers are literally at the end of it, our communication with God changes. Because now we go in mentally prepared to encounter three distinct possibilities. God says yes, God says no, and God says wait. Now here's the thing. I don't get to know whether God's no is a no or is it a wait. What do? I'm impatient. And this is where your strategizing comes in place. When you don't receive an answer immediately, you have to tell God and remind Him that you trust Him. You need to tell Him that you can't understand His silence, but you're willing to wait till you have a definite answer. You ask Him to resolve your query and concern. Think about it. There are days when maybe the electricity or you have a power cut at home. And there could be other days when you don't have your Wi-Fi connections working. What do? You pick up the phone and you call customer care. Now, when you call customer care, do you immediately get the electricity back within 2 minutes? No. The customer care executive tells you, we are going to look at the problem. We're going to delineate what exactly happened. Please give us some time. If you're willing to wait for another human being to answer your question, why and what stops you from accepting that God has also asked you to wait? Now, those who know me well know that the last year, which is 2019 in fact, was easily the toughest years of my life. 2019 and 2020 put together was by far the most toughest phase that one like me could ever encounter. At one point, I had both my parents in the hospital, and then my mother was readmitted and put on a ventilator. Now, here's the thing. The doctors told me that the chances for her survival were 0.01%. Imagine when your heart constricts within itself and the tightness spreads all over. You feel this overpowering numbness overcome you. That was me as I headed to the ICU. I was with my cousin. He was told to stay outside. And I walked with the doctor to my mother. There she lay, motionless. I was later taken to a family counseling room. Steeling myself, I said a prayer that God should keep my mother alive and healthy. And as I sat in front of the doctor, I simply asked, should I give up hope? No, came the instant reply. Remember, she just had a 0.01% chance of survival. And yet, this doctor was telling me, no, I did not have to give up on hope. Quite honestly, that was all that I needed to hear. Because thereafter, I don't remember any of the conversation that ensued. I just remember the word no. No, I didn't have to give up. No, I didn't have to think that I was losing my mother. On the day of her surgery, as my brother and I sat outside the operation theatre, I felt myself completely blank out. We were making small talk, we were trying to have a conversation, finally failing, and then deciding to just look at the TV in front of us. It was a far safer option. But here's what happened. In all of that restlessness and the uneasiness that was flooding me, I realized that I needed to talk to someone who was not human at all. And so, I prayed. I prayed that God would give my mother a new lease of life. Now here, I didn't know if the answer was to be a yes, a no, or wait. All that I knew was I had to be strong for my family, for my mother. Instead of asking God to only help my mother, I asked Him to give all of us the strength to bear the outcome. We didn't know which way the pendulum would swing, but I had to keep my faith. I couldn't give up. A week later, my mother was weaned off slowly, off the ventilator, 10 days to be exact, 10 excruciatingly painful days. And I'm glad that I chose to hear the first voice that spoke to me. Because even today, I believe that that voice was not of a doctor. It was not of a human being at all. It was God telling me that I did not need to give up, neither on my mother nor on him. In the doctor's no was God's yes to me. God was assuring me that my mother would live, she would survive. Sometimes we are so blinded by pain, so utterly saddened and disheartened by what is happening around us that we tend to become cold, and in fact we tend to stonewall God and our faith. This is unfair to Him because He may have already given us the answer that we are looking for, but because we aren't looking enough, we aren't ready for the answer. We are too scared to open that gift that is already in front of us. So we choose to overlook it because we don't know whether there's a yes, a no, or a wait. The answer that we are looking for in so many different places makes us continue to fumble in the dark, even though the light is exactly behind us. We don't choose to look behind because we are scared. This is the long and short, my friends, of strategizing in prayer. When you don't get an answer, prayerfully ask, dutifully seek, and accept that you will find yourself. You will find your happiness, you will find your peace. But for all of that to happen, you have to submit yourself to God so that you see His answers play out in front of you. Accepting God's answer as is also a strategy. A story is told of the prophet Samuel, whose mother was barren for many, many years. Each one of us knows how difficult it is to be married and without a child, to see your neighbors' homes filled with the cackle of young children, the wail of infants, but to see your own home deserted and completely silent. Now she could have given up, and yet she did not. She continued to pray year after year, day after day. She continued to be devoted and faithful to her God because she believed. She believed that God had not yet answered for a bigger, a greater reason. How many times have you lost your faith in the midst of a financial or a personal crisis? How many times have you found yourself saying, I don't believe in God because He doesn't listen to me? Remember to go back to Samuel's mother's story. Because long years after, she vowed that she would dedicate her child to the house of the Lord. Now just imagine, you're asking for a gift and you're placing it right back in God's hands. Do you know how difficult it would have been for a mother who had waited for so long to get a child to place that baby back into God's fold? But that was the extent and depth of her faith. It was a prayerful mother who had given a painful promise, but she held her end just as God held His. As young Samuel grew up, she left him in the synagogue. And that is the true strategy of prayer. Not just asking God and advising Him and telling Him that you didn't like X and you didn't like Y, but reminding yourself that you need to accept and follow His instructions. Make sure that you keep your promise before you ask God for something the next time. You need to be faithful not just on the days of sunshine and joy and mirth, but especially on days when you find your entire world crumbling around you, when you feel your trouble actually weighing you down, your trials, your temptations afflicting you. This is where you need your faith. This is where you need your prayer. This is where you strategize. When we choose faith over fear and we choose to use prayer as our strongest weapon, we realize the true nature, the power, the scope, the extent of God's mercy, His grace, and His abundance in our lives. Because we have already accepted that God is only making us for abundance. He has given us abundance. He will give us only abundance. If you've enjoyed this episode of Chasing Hope, we look forward to hearing from you. Do write into me. Do share your thoughts, your suggestions, your prayer requests, and definitely log on to www.chasinghopewithkatherine.com for our past episodes. I look forward to meeting you in the next episode. Until then, stay safe.